Hello, and welcome once again to Age of Wonders Planetfall. My name is Orange, and I think it's finally time. I think it's time to try to do a tactical fights battle, as I discussed in the last video or two. My goal for the video is to do, as best I can, a really good coverage of the generic things that you always care about in every tactical fight, no matter what units you're bringing. And then hopefully maybe there'll be enough time to do a discussion about Amazon-specific things. Because that's what I'm playing. I'm just continuing the game that I was doing in the last video. So I am Sky Puncher, the Puncher of Sky, Amazon Celestian, but at this point in the game, all I have are the default Amazon racial units. I don't have anything special there. A couple of these are Lancers, but nothing really surprising. Sure. Yeah, that's fine. Let's get some of the scout stuff out of the way, just so that I don't have to worry about it for the rest of the turn. Sure, go there. Alright. I took a look before the video started. None of these fights are particularly great, because they should be all pretty easy, I guess. For the sake of discussion, let's just do this fight. It'll be a little harder than that easy roll. So we are gonna manual this instead of auto it, because we're not talking about auto discussions. Operation Scrambler, that's fine, that's not a huge deal. Okay, so for tactical fights, as the AI goes here, before we really talk too much about what moves do and what even I want to be doing here, let's take a step back and talk about what is a unit and what is it good for in a tactical battle. And a unit, again, there's a bunch of all these little tags and stuff, but I want to go even higher level, even simpler than that. A unit is a hit points. It is a amount of health combined with a damage, so an amount of damage it can do, combined, and this is very important, combined with an action pool, a number of things that unit can do every turn. Hit points and damage at the simplest level are identical in my mind. The more hit points something has, the longer it can last in battle and the more damage it can do. So having more hit points relates to damage, vice versa. If you do more damage, you don't have to live as long in order to get the same amount of use. So from this high level discussion, damage and hit points are the same thing. So it's just like the existence of the unit. And the other point, the one that is important then, is going back to action points. A unit is a number of actions it can do every turn. A unit is no good to you. Okay, a unit is almost no good to you if it can't do anything, if it has no actions. So in a fight, what you are bringing to the table is a certain number of hit points / damage, a certain amount of that, and a certain number of actions. And this is why having more units is a massive advantage in battle, because if you have more actions than the other player, even if your actions are individually weaker, it is very often the case that you will win anyways, just because you are way more flexible in what you can do. If you have more actions, you can afford to do things that are not pure damage, that are not just killing a unit, so you can do something like a flash arrow. No, that's not a great... Well, you can do some other abilities that maybe don't directly damage or directly remove actions. And in Planetfall, as opposed to Age of Wonders 3, one of the great things about Planetfall that's different, that makes the tactical battles, in my mind, even more exciting than the great battles that Age of Wonders 3 gave you, is with the stagger system, you now have an alternate method of winning fights. You don't just have to kill the other player. If you consistently remove actions from the other player, that is a perfectly viable and powerful way to potentially win fights. Conversely, that means that from the perspective of how do I defeat an opponent, how do I react to what an opponent can bring, not only do you have to consider how much hit points do I have, how survivable are my units, you have to consider how resistant am I to losing actions. Some races have they're very resistant losing actions by nature. The most obvious case is the Devour. Almost all Devour attacks only require a single action, they're not repeating. And in exchange, they do more damage, but typically less damage than a full repeating attack would be from another faction, right? I think, well, we can look it up. If I compare a Trencher, the Devout Trencher has a single 16 strength attack, as opposed to my Huntresses here, which have a repeating 10 strength attack. So, in a perfect world, this unit, this Huntress, will be doing 30 damage for an attack, whereas a Trencher can only do half that. That seems unbalanced, but in practice, because the Trencher can always ensure, well, almost always ensure, that it will have an action and be able to use that attack, the Devourer are very resistant to losing actions, because they don't need as many actions to get full use, or nearly full use, out of their units. So that is a very important consideration that I don't know if like an introductory player would necessarily grasp right away. Most people, I think, understand, yep, if I do a whole bunch of damage or have a whole bunch of hit points, that's one way to win a fight, but you may not always be in a case where you just have more or better units than the opponent. Sometimes you have to try to figure out an alternate way, or maybe the opponent stacks a bunch of armor and shields and you don't know how do I deal with that. One path is to deal with actions as opposed to just killing a unit. So kind of bringing it back down from that discussion, which we'll keep in mind going forward, in tactical battles, when you show up, you have a certain number of units with a certain number of actions and a certain number of hit points. So does the opponent. And as I said a little bit before earlier, that damage and hit points are kind of the same thing, and that actions are very important, those two things combine to mean that killing units is paramount. Every unit that you actually kill removes its damage from the board, so you're removing more than hit points, you're also removing its damage potential. And you're also removing those actions from the board. So almost regardless of what the unit is, killing any unit in a tactical fight is crucial. It is almost always better to secure a kill than to do anything else in a tactical battle. Again, there's caveats to that, especially when you start getting into, can my unit reduce actions and other methods? Is the unit I'm looking to kill already stunned or concussed, or something like that? But generally, securing kills is the first thing that you want to focus on in a tactical battle. The second thing is you'd like to kill the opponent's units without unduly putting your own units at risk. That can be hard to do depending on what race you are. Some races are just naturally glass cannons. And it can be hard to do depending on the type of unit. Some units need different types of defenses to be most effective. So something like the Huntress, right? The Huntress has a repeating attack, so stagger resist is not bad, but even if I get staggered once, I'm still going to get something out of my attack. And I can do it at range, so once I get up there, once I get into range, I may not have to move around a whole lot. If I compare that to a Lancer, or a hero that's effectively a Lancer, it's also a repeating attack, so again, stagger resist is kind of nice from that perspective of always getting my attacks, but more importantly, this is a melee unit, and a melee unit needs movement to get up to the opponent, and getting staggered as a melee unit is very crippling because you're losing that ability to get up there, and to make contact with the opponent and then still be able to do an attack. Well, not again. For movement, there are the 3 movement ranges, right? There's the movement range where you don't lose any actions. There's a movement where you lose 1. There's a movement where you lose 2. And then there's the one that you don't even have enough to do a defense action. Getting staggered once means that my movement goes from all the way to here and still being able to attack, or hit a defense mode, to here. So that's 3 extra tiles that I've lost from getting staggered once, which is a pretty big deal for a melee unit. Other ways to defend, so stagger resistance is a type of defense from that perspective, right? Because you're trying to defend not just your hit points, but also your ability to deal damage and your ability to inflict staggers, right? And to be able to remove damage or remove actions from the board. Other ways are just pure damage resist, right? This unit has something that's giving it some psionic resistance. It also has quite a bit of shields and a 1 point of armor. All that is also very good. You can really just raise hit points. Again, this is all pretty basic stuff that I think people relatively new to the game can understand. But what they may not understand is there are diminishing returns for almost every one of these. Hit points is really the only one that you never really want to not get more hit points. It's always just good to get more hit points. The issue is that typically hit point or adding hit points is a little weaker on a mod for mod basis than being able to add the shielding. Or armor or whatever the damage resists. So, like 1 point of shielding, again, depending on how much you're stacking, is on the order of 5 to 10% resist. So, if it's 10%, that's only 4.5 hit points, which isn't actually, so from that perspective, on this unit, adding hit points is more powerful than adding armor or shields. But that's not true for every unit. And that's not always true because many races just don't have a easy way to add hit points. It's pretty rare. Adding shielding, again, there's some diminishing returns for shielding and armor and psionic resistance. As a general rule of thumb, if you don't want to do if you don't actually want to do all the math, a point of resistance starts at 10% and it goes down from there. Relatively slowly. It's an exponential curve, but usually you just assume that any damage point is something like 5 to 10%, and that's probably good enough. Once you start hitting 10 total, that's when you start figuring that you're getting enough diminishing returns that maybe you should look towards trying to do something else to increase survivability. Can no longer be flanked is one that's a little unique to the Amazons. A lot of races have a lot of difficulty with doing that, and can no longer be flanked is a way of defending your units that is not particularly useful for anything but melee, just because in general your ranged units shouldn't be in a position to be easily flanked. Obviously it'll happen depending on how fights go, but it's a low enough risk that you probably want to focus on something else. Going back towards the discussion that hit points and damage are roughly the same thing, you can just abandon defense entirely and go towards always just adding damage. This is very risky, pretty much inversely related to how much in the front line that unit's going to be. So if you're a melee unit and you got to get in there, being a glass cannon is not great because you have to make it and live to be able to do any damage. So you probably want your melee range stuff and your shoulder range stuff to focus more on defense than on offense. But for snipers, artillery units, maybe some types of flyer, depending, in that case you may want to say, well, no, I want more offense because this unit I don't expect to die quickly and I need it to do more killing, because it doesn't do me any good if everything else in the battlefield is dead and this guy's just plinking away, not doing any damage, and everything can focus it. In an ideal world, if you're going to lose a fight, all your units would die in the same turn, because the units that were taking the hits would be the ones with a bunch of defense stats and a bunch of hit points, and so they would be tanking all the hits and not dying, so you don't lose any actions in your round. While the stuff further back, or the stuff that's in non-vulnerable positions, won't have taken any hits, which means that you've optimized them for purely doing damage. And so if you would lose the fight, everything would die in the same turn, because you would have optimized who has the extra defense, who has the extra offense. Is there anything else to talk on that? Again, securing kills is paramount, which is why I won't be able to use special operations in this fight, unfortunately. But that's why I think I said in my first or second video that often the best thing to do with a special operation is just to secure a kill, because that makes sure that those actions are gone and that damage is gone from the battle. So that is very powerful, and that is why you always want to have at least one direct damage nuke ability, just to be able to pull that out of your back pocket if it comes to it, because accruing small advantages like that are how you win the big fights, right? 3-stack versus 3-stack, 36 units plus in the same fight. And I guess that's probably a good enough overall discussion that I can just talk about Amazons in particular. So, when you're looking at the Amazons, and I will ignore the Scout for now, so let's just look at their initial 3 units, right? So they have the Huntress, they have the Lancer, and they have the Biomancer. And they struggle with range. The Huntress only has a 5-range attack. Ditto for the Biomancer, only has a 5-range attack. The Lancer actually has, well, no, it's also only 5-range. For some reason I thought it was longer. Anyways, so they struggle with range, which means that you want more survivability generally than you want damage, because, again, as I said, there's a kind of inverse relationship of the closer you have to be to your opponent, the more you need to be able to tank so that you can effectively use your actions and not just lose the unit before it gets any actions off. There isn't a whole lot of ability for Huntresses to tank all that much. These aren't a great example because they're Prime, right? They've got a whole bunch of extra hit points on them, so they're actually pretty survivable. But the easily available mods to Amazons that add survivability, again, can no longer be flanked. This adds Psi Resist, which isn't a huge deal. Adds a point of shielding, which is always okay, but it's also only mounted units, so you can't put this on Huntresses anyways. This is specifically a Celestian mod, but it's very similar to the Amazon mod that provides stagger resistance, and I think it's some arc resistance. Again, often doesn't matter. But that stagger resistance is most useful on either single attack units or melee units. Well, your Huntresses are multi-attack units, your Biomancers are multi-attack units, but your Lancers are melee units. So the Amazons, despite the fact that their core unit is a ranged unit, and a pretty good damage dealer, again, this is a high damage number and ignores cover and unit penalties, the Amazons are really a melee race to start the game. Just because their mods are oriented towards doing melee damage. Depending on your secret tech, you can maybe change that a little bit. You can stack damage on your Huntresses, but because you will always be outranged by your opponent, stacking damage is just not as effective than it would be for something like not even snipers, but even just the Vanguard Trooper or something, right? That they've got those extra 2 tiles. They're going to get more shots off before you can do damage to them. It's great to be a glass cannon, but you need something in the front line just to keep their attention off of your glass cannons in the back. So the Amazon game plan, as I see it, and there might be some other people with different opinions out there, but I play quite a bit of Amazons, and what works for me is you need some Lancers that are going to be flanking a little bit, but you also can't be afraid, and you should have them kitted out, so you shouldn't be afraid of throwing them straight at the enemy. Just go straight forward, get into the front lines, and then from there, tank some shots, have enough of them that they can work in teams, so that one starts hitting an opponent and gets some flanking shots off, and then the other one can come and swing around with its extra movement and then get some flanking shots off from the other side. And your goal is to swarm with your Lancers, do a bunch of damage, try to get kills, and if you can't, bring just enough Huntresses that, since they have a little bit of range, pretty good damage, and ignore cover penalties and ignore unit penalties. So if you have a unit in melee that's blocking it that doesn't reduce the damage, your Huntresses can secure kills. So your primary unit is the Lancer. The Huntresses are your secondary extra damage dealers, something that it's easy for your opponent to ignore until they realize that you've killed half of their army with Huntresses plinking damage while the Lancer took all the shots. And then you want to bring Biomancers, because Biomancers are an excellent unit, probably the best one on the roster. And I don't mean just the basic roster, I mean just period. The whole Amazon roster, this is probably their best unit. Because as a support, it's got everything you want. It has a heal that's 25 points, so nothing super above power, but it removes status effects. Not psionic, but you have ways to get resistance to psionic effects. But removing status effects is not a common thing. Many of the other support units don't do that. And this will keep your Lancers upright, full of actions, and not debuffed. Your Biomancer also has Manipulate Sleep, which is a way to reduce actions, and reduce them to 0. Just no actions whatsoever. So this works against units that would otherwise not be vulnerable against losing actions. It gets you around Stagger Resist, and it gets you around units that have just one single strong attack as opposed to a repeating attack. Scan Catalog, again, it goes straight with the game plan of go straight at the enemy, try to double team them. This is very good at single unit armies, obviously, but it's also on a cooldown, so in prolonged fights you can get multiple uses of it. And it lets you focus down units you may have been kind of ignoring, like, you know, the heroes. That's kind of a support hero, a bunch of HP, not a lot of damage. You haven't done too much to it. This lets you later on in the fight be able to make it very vulnerable to dying once you started clearing out some of the chaff in the front. The Bioblast is okay. Again, it's actually only 1 point of damage less than the Huntress's damage, but it doesn't have the line of sight override. It obeys all those laws. If you're using your Bioblaster on the Biomancer, unless it's the 4th or 5th round of the fight, you probably should have been doing something else, because most often you'll have scan with your first turn, try to sleep with your second turn, or maybe even vice versa depending on the threat, because both of those are on a cooldown, which is nuts. And then you want to use your heal when you need to use your heal, but between these two abilities that are on cooldowns, you rarely will be using these guys for damage. You should probably bring one per stack, because it also gives you the out of battle healing as well. That's about right. That gives you enough that they can kind of keep all these guys up, and the fact that these guys are doing action reducing abilities or buffing other units' damage it helps ameliorate the fact that otherwise you have a unit you're bringing along that's not typically dealing damage. It's just a HP pool. So again, that's my basic philosophy with the Amazons. Let's see if I can put it in action and actually do something in this fight that I've been talking for the past 20 minutes about. They have Overwatch. I'm not too concerned, because I think it's just a single action Overwatch. Don't know if there's a way to check that. I don't know how far it moved. But one of these units is the one I want to be doing it with. Probably the one that's got 45 hit points. Okay, single attack, missed. Let's just bring the other Lancer up. Put them both in defense mode. Again, Lancers also have a very good defense mode, and a special one that adds extra shields, which makes them very hard to die. Wait, oh wait, this isn't a Lancer, this is a hero. Okay. Normally, Lancers have that +2 shield defense mode. My heroes do not, so that hurts a little bit, but they have other advantages. Other things to note with Amazons in particular is that Manipulate Sleep is short range, but Scan Catalog is not, so you can often get that off in the first round of battle. From long range, sniper range in fact. Bring these guys up. Your Huntresses, aside from just being pure damage dealers, also have an AoE blind and stagger, so this is a way to reduce actions, which as I said is very good. That was an accident, but no big deal. It is on a cooldown. It's fine. It's a good ability. Like I said, I typically feel more often that you will want to be doing damage with your Huntresses as opposed to be doing action reduction, because your melee units will be doing action reduction once they get up there. All melee attacks have a built-in stagger. However, this is good if your opponent is nice enough to give you a nice fat stack of units to use it on. And it's also good because of blinding, so if it's a high priority target that for some reason is going to be or isn't resistant to blind, you can reduce its accuracy and make it have a higher chance of not being useful to your opponent. And I guess I'll just put this guy up here and then end my turn. This should be a pretty easy fight. So as a side discussion, I talked a little bit about morale. I spent a whole video on it. And one of the reasons morale is so powerful is because not only is it increasing your attack stats, right? It's effectively making your attack / HP pool all that much better per unit. It also is a way that if you're inflicting negative morale, you are reducing your opponent's actions because of the fumble chances. And if you have very good morale on your own units, you are also helping your action economy because you are getting guaranteed hits when you crit. So it's doubly good to have morale, and it's one of the reasons why I think morale is maybe the most, it's the most important game mechanic that's not directly just a how do I hit units in the game. Okay, I won't be able... Again, this is a case of a kill. I don't really have a great way to... Ooh, I can flank this guy, but I'd have to go past the melee overwatch, so let's just do that. Destroyed. Again, super extra bonus damage is great. Do a little damage for my Huntresses at range. Let's put this guy up here. Can he reach with that? He can't, but that's a low priority unit anyways. Again, this is the reverse engineer here gave up its entire action to create a construct, which is adding extra actions and adding an extra HP damage pool. So that's a very powerful ability you want to use. Although it's it's not a whole bunch of HP, but it's a unit you have to deal with. Now we can look at Manipulate Sleep. Put that guy to sleep. I probably should have damaged him first, but that's fine. I don't have an Overwatch, but I don't think Overwatch is great. We'll talk about that probably with... That guy exploded, which wasn't a great use of his actions.
Enemy killed.
Just kill him. And we can use our flanking. And charge.
Enemy annihilate. Our forces are victorious.
And kill that unit. Alright, let's do one more fight. Again, safe battles should be pretty easy. I do have a disadvantage here that the opponent is using strikes. Flying units are often a problem for melee units. Luckily, my Lancers, or Lancer equivalents, have a built-in ranged attack. It's not great. Often it's best used basically as a preliminary to next turn you expect to get into melee range, but it's fine for killing strikes, so it should be. Let's add hit points to this guy, and let's add soulburn to this guy, and we'll manual. So the other thing with the Amazons to note is they're not really a great sit back and take it faction. Many of the melee races really aren't, but the Amazons, because they're going to always struggle with range, they don't have many units on their roster that can deal range, pretty much the main one they have is their artillery unit, which is the, I forget what it is, or what its name is. It's the one of the Bombardon is almost the only unit that natively has range if you don't get into the secret attacks, and it's pretty late in the tech tree for them to get. The opponent won't come to you. You have to go to the opponent, which is another reason why you want to have all your Lancers, because they're more likely to survive to get there, as opposed to trying to focus on Huntresses. You also don't have an Overwatch, so you have no incentive to sit and wait for the enemy to come to you. It just won't do any good, because you can only do a defense mode, which defense mode is usually a low priority thing to do. If you're anywhere close to range, especially for Amazons, like defense mode is a wasted action. All you're doing is adding a little bit of HP, which in some cases is what you need to do, but I don't think defense mode is often very good. That being said, I do think defense mode is probably better than Overwatch for many races, depending on what other Overwatch things you can stack. Okay, I can maybe just one-shot these guys. So let's do it.
Enemy killed.
One shot.
Enemy
One
killed.
shot. This is a very easy fight. Since I don't have anything better to do with my action, let's get some hit points out, because I can. Let's check their movement. So other little tactical tips and tricks, less so philosophy and more just things that you may or may not already know. If you click on a unit, you can see its movement and its movement ranges, right? So this guy can move this far by itself, but it also has the air leap, so it can move this far and then leap for 3 more tiles. Or combat jump, the air leap is the flying units. This guy is actually able to hit that, which is a little bit of a problem, not a huge problem. Manipulate sleep is 5. If you click on this, you can see if you're going to be in range of being able to use it. So let's go here. 65, 80%. Oh, let's sleep the one that's a higher chance. And I could do an attack, but this guy's not going to move. He's already been dealt with. I can do 16 damage. Oh, I can be harder to hit and cannot be flanked. Now, for my positioning here, this guy, he's only got melee attacks, right? So he can attack this unit, or this unit. If he does anything but attack me, he's going to have to go past my melee unit and suck up some melee Overwatch. That means I expect him to come in and attack me. If I do 16 damage, that's okay, but if I do defense mode, I'm 25% harder to hit. I already can't be flanked. I have a whole bunch of hit points on this unit. So let's just do the attack, because I already can't be staggered. So if he comes and hits me, he's going to do 13 damage, and then get hit 3 times. So let's get my damage in while I can. And it was a crit, so even better. Lucky. Can this guy reach? He cannot. No, wait, what? No line of sight. That's annoying. Well, let's try to blind him and stagger him. Okay, so that was easy. Secure the kills with my Huntresses in the back.
Enemy annihilated.
I can't get both my Lancers in. Get a war cry off. I guess that's kind of cool. Let's do that. Oh, after I move. Stupid. 16 damage. Poison won't matter, because I expect this guy will just die from my hit.
Enemy eliminated.
Again,
Victory
easy
is
fight.
ours.
And I knew these were going to be because I'm not really in a position in the game to be fighting big fights. This is an interesting pickup. The food is okay. The Dragonfly, I typically find that vehicles are often a bad choice if you're not directly planning to have have them or pick up a unit that starts with a vehicle. I've never really used the Dragonfly. I don't know if it's good. The big one is the Wild Bombardon here. Gland Secretion. I don't actually know what the difference is between the Wild Bombardon. So let's learn live. Let's learn things. It is a 7 range. Okay, so it really doesn't have anything special. It's a tier 3 for some reason. Just because it's a fat stack of hit points, I guess. And it's a pretty big attack. Amphibious is a neat little trick, but it's a large target. It's a tier 3, so it's going to cost quite a bit in upkeep. I think in a real game, I would just sell it. And go from there. Again, I've got some upgrade points. Anything cool on here? This is my commander. Let's give everything accuracy and close quarter specialist. Okay, was there any other tactical discussion I wanted to have? We talked about operations, we talked about actions, and we talked about hit points and damage. So I guess Amazons have relatively simple units. Most of the co-racial units are relatively simple. There's some exceptions. So there's not a lot of other little accessory abilities to have to discuss about abilities that don't directly do damage or that directly reduce actions. I guess one good example would be on this unit. I have the War Cry ability, which is giving up 3 full actions, which is a big deal, right? I can't move, I can't really do anything. Oh, I can move 1 tile, but I can't do any damage. And in exchange, I will be doing damage with other units for a few turns. So when and how to use this is not a trivial judgment call. Usually, if you can, it's probably best to just get it off right away. If you remember, often I forget, but you want to try to do it in a time when you're giving up the least amount of actions that matter as possible. So if you do it right away, turn 1, you've got a bunch of units that are already close to you. And it lasts for 3 rounds, so you'll probably, at least in exchange for not being able to move too much on a unit that's relatively fast to move, you'll probably get 2 turns of the bonus damage across several units. So for this one in particular, it's often useful to do it first. But for anything that's not a direct damage or that's not a direct stagger, that's the sort of thing you have to think about of, when will I actually use this? When will it actually be useful? And again, there are other more complicated ones that deserve further discussion once I start getting around to maybe talking about other races and their tactics in battle. Which I don't know if that'll be the next video, or maybe I'll digress to something else before coming back. I guess I can quick talk about my thoughts on some of the other Amazon units. The problem being that many of them I don't use that often, because in multiplayer you'll use the co-units a lot because they'll be available to you. You're going to start with some of them, and they're easy options to see, okay, what mods can I put on them, and I have them quickly. Anything you have to tech into is a commitment, and if you've picked a secret tech, usually your secret tech units are the quickest way you have towards going towards your ultimate goal in your game of what are you building towards. So unless there's something in particular down your racial tree you're really trying to work towards, I find that in my strategy, the way I tend to play games and a lot of the people I play with, going to get racial units just ends up being a low priority. You'll still use them in militia fights, so it's good to know basically what they can do. But you probably won't get a whole ton of them. Alright, so with that caveat, meaning that I haven't actually used a bunch of these units, the Arborian Sentinel is it's a specialist unit, a support unit, so it's not intended to be a huge damage dealer, and what it is, it has Manipulate Shield, so it gives a little bit of defensive ability, notably as a free action, so it doesn't have to give up anything to do this ability. It can just do it on cooldown. Shielding is great. It fits in with your Amazon game plan of toss this on a melee unit that's going to be rushing up towards the front. It'll absorb a bunch of shots, but it's going to be mitigated by having the shield on it, and it's still going to be able to get there to the opponent and start really doing melee damage. It also has Thorn Roots, which is a lightly damaging, mostly primarily a control tool. The Entangle is really what you want out of this, so that you can take a unit that's a high priority. I want this unit to not move. I want to know where it is, so maybe because you want to get your lances on it so that you can get a whole bunch of flanks off. And maybe just because it's another an opponent melee unit that you think is going to just out damage you in the melee fight, and you need it to stay for the back so that you can plink away at it, either with your Sentinel in future turns or with your Huntresses that you're bringing around. Again, this isn't really meant to be a damaging unit as much. The light laser cannon is fine, but it's not. This isn't something you're gonna spec the unit out for. You're not gonna put a whole bunch of mods on it to exploit the laser cannon. The reason you want this unit is for the other stuff. The Thorn Roots and Manipulate Shields. It's got a unique defense mode, which is kind of cool. It can self-heal, which most things cannot. It's also stagger immune, which means you're definitely going to be able to do something with it the turn afterwards. It is a heavy unit, which means that it can't take cover, but it can provide cover, which might be nice in an open field map where you have Huntresses that you need. There might not be cover within 5 tiles. This can provide it. It does mean that it's a little squishy, but I think it's an okay unit. It also has Forest Camouflage, which is funny. Not sure if it's useful, but it's funny. I think the next one up the tree is the Harrier, which is a flying unit. I have mixed feelings in flying units. I believe they can be good. In certain situations, I find in tactical, they struggle a little bit. They can't take cover. They often have to get a little close. Ironically, the Harrier is one of the longer ranged options that the Amazons have. And it's okay. It's fine. Again, it's got only okay defensive stats. But Laser Bombardment is a pretty powerful ability. Unfortunately, it's only range 4, not range 5. But it does a lot of damage over an AoE, and if you put some of the... This is a unit that you put some of the laser mods on so that it can do AoE stagger, AoE inflict burning, toys like that. Interception blasters, again, it's one of your longer range options, and this is your primary anti-air unit, is your own air unit. Stagger resistance is also good on any of the large units. We won't even talk about water units because they're bad. I did, since going back for a second, the Sentinel has Forest Camouflage. The Huntress does too, which is something that is rarely useful, but occasionally in a multiplayer game, an ability like this is one that you can pull out on the strategic level as a neat trick, where you just have a stack of Huntresses your opponent didn't know about, and you can either ambush another stack that you think you can beat, or maybe you have a way to go past the part of the map that your opponent is actively scouting, get in behind one of his cities, and be able to knock it down. Tricks like that were way more powerful in Age of Wonders 3 than Planetfall, because in Age of Wonders 3, defending cities was way harder than it is in Planetfall. A stack of Huntresses would have to be pretty modded out to be able to beat, to be equivalent strength as a tier 1 militia plus turrets. Game strength is an actual real strength, so you maybe would be able to easily handle that fight, but it's way harder to be able to take a city with minimal losses and then hold on to it long enough to raise it or migrate or whatever, do something to it. I still think there's potential there. It's just it's tougher to utilize an ability like that, especially on a core tier 1 unit that just doesn't it doesn't have the damage and the flexibility to be able to be all on its own out as a single unit in a stack, or a single type of unit in a stack. I think the Bombardown is the next one up from the Harrier. Like I said, the Bombardown gives you one of your ranged options. It's relatively hard to get to because it's a few techs up the tree, but it has some very good attacks. The Bio Cannon is huge damage. 15 repeating damage on Bio is great. This is absolutely a unit that you would spec out with Bio mods if you have them available to you. The bombardment, like all the other artillery units, the archetype is a every other turn attack, so you can't always just spam it out, but when you can, you definitely want to. It's a stagger, it's an AoE damage. Demolisher is situationally useful as well. Less useful for Amazons because your Huntresses ignore cover anyways, and your other primary damage is probably going to be a Lancer, which doesn't worry too much about it because it's going to be meleeing preferably. But it can still be helpful to be able to do Demolisher. It also has the Shields Up defense mode, which I don't know if you'd ever really have a Bombardown in a situation that you want to be defense moding it, but maybe. Stagger Resist is good because your full action your bombardment is a full action, and you don't want to lose actions of your massive attack, and it's just always good. Stagger Resistance is always a good thing. It has Amphibious. Again, that's a neat trick. I don't think you're going to really have a situation where you're floating around a stack of Bombardons and you need to care about Amphibious, but it's a nice flavor addition. Next comes my favorite unit in the Amazon roster, is the Pteranodon, which I have heard people say that they don't like this unit. I think it's awesome, because Mighty Roar is nuts. This ability is so good. It's significantly less useful in small fights, like a 6 units versus 6 units, one stack versus one stack. But if you can get a big fight, 18 versus 18, or more, Mighty Roar is very powerful because Panic does two things. One, it removes all the actions of any unit of all panicked units the next turn because they're forced to run away. And as I said, actions and removing actions is extremely powerful. You effectively just remove X number of units from the fight for a turn. Second, it takes all your opponent's units out of position as well, which means that they have to spend actions the turn after that again to get back to a position where they want to be, and maybe they have to move back up in order to do damage. Maybe they're just out of cover entirely, so your non-Huntress ranged units can deal extra damage to them. Mighty Roar, it wins fights. Like, if you cast this at the right time, it will win you a fight single-handedly just from this one ability on this one unit. It's also a psi damage, or a psi channel inflict, which is not something that usually people are speccing against for Amazons, so you may be able to use that as a workaround if your opponent's starting to stack damage resist towards the stuff that you normally deal damage with. Pteranodon, notably, is one of the units you get from your Tier 3 militia, and it is a very... I love getting one of these from my militia units because it just wins fights so well. Tail Swipe, knockback is debatably bad. It is a massive impact, notably, so it gets past your first level of stagger resistance. It's this low AoE, 3 tiles in front of the tile the 2 tiles to the side of the tile are actually attacking. It's probably not worth running up to do a tail swipe usually. Maybe if you're knocking something out of cover. The rapid laser cannons is actually not bad either. 14 damage is pretty high. But really the attraction here is this guy. The Mighty Roar is what wins you the fight, and then this is just a way to do damage until you can either roar again or until you've won the fight because you've cast it. The last unit is the Tier 4 Arborian Queen, and Tier 4s are units that I have never seen one in the multiplayer games I play. They just end too fast. Other types of game modes that are not on the smallest map available, 1v1, you might start to see tier 4s pop out. So, since I've never played with it, I don't really have strong feelings about it. I feel like it's a totally fine one-of support type unit. Spawn first is a neat trick because you have your first camouflage stuff. Um, Biological recovery, again, it's a neat trick, but you probably won't need it because you should have your biomancers anyways. You'll want biomancers for the entire game. Um, that's a really big AoE, entangle, stagger. That's a game winner, or a battle winner by itself, potentially. Regrowth, eh. You need to have a plant or animal unit. You probably won't have one of those. That is a Bombodon animal? It is an animal. Is the Lancer considered an animal? It is not. Okay. So, that's a neat trick. I don't know if it's going to come up a whole lot. That's very good. That's a huge AoE heal. Yeah, there's... Amazon Queen is... My reading of it, again, without having ever actually used it, is this is roughly the platonic ideal of a support unit. It's just got massive AoE action removal, massive AoE heal, and it can respawn one unit that's died in the battle already, so it's good. Biocannon, again, it's the same attack that the Bombodon has, so it can't be bad. And yeah, that's my somewhat quick opinion on Amazons. Hopefully the discussion that I had about how I just generically think about tactical battles has been useful. And hopefully the way that I approach Amazons in particular has also been useful. And again, one final caveat of this is just Amazon racials. Obviously, once you start throwing in special secret tech units, things can change drastically in the way you want to approach fights. But for your early game matchups and as a fallback that will always kind of work, that's the way I think Amazons go, is a few Huntresses, focus on Lancers, and bring Biomancers along just as generic support units. And go from there. So, as always, enjoy Planetfall. Have a good one.